Go ahead. Welcome to PariChai with Pulipaka. In this fifth episode, as you must have seen in the last four episodes, I've been hosting guests from Latin America, Europe, and even last week we had guests from Africa. So this week, we go all the way to the United States of America and meet an interesting person who will make your time watching this video worth it. A wise man once said, "The world is a tragedy to those who feel, but a comedy to those who think." And my guest today also thinks it's okay to joke about climate change. And in fact, he thinks laughing about it may help us put an end to it. My guest today is environmental education specialist, Mr. Patrick Chandler. Patrick, a very warm welcome to PariChai with Pulipaka.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Before we begin our conversation, I would like to, tell my audience more about you and whatever. I know there's a lot to talk about you, but whatever I was able to gather from the open web, I have collected. So Patrick here is a PhD student from the University of Colorado Boulder at the Center for Science and Technology Policy Research. His interest in the intersection of art and climate change dates back to his previous job in Alaska, where he coordinated the marine debris cleanup program at the Center for Alaskan Coastal Studies. Alongside a team of wonderful professors whose specialties range from theater to evolutionary biology, Chandler is part of an unusual but an interesting and exhilarating project at University of Colorado Boulder, which is called Inside the Greenhouse. This project uses a variety of tools like drama, film, fine art, performance art, television, and other creative media to enhance people's understanding of climate change issues. Participating students collaborate not only on climate-themed projects, but they work very closely together with each other, right from the conception to completion of the project. And these finished pieces convey not just simple messages, but powerful messages about the global predicament, which is, I think, partly the interest of Chandler. And we got to know that he's very interested in how the artistic processes itself can affect the creators and how he sees a model for this kind of imaginative collaboration. I personally came across Chandler's work while I was reading a publication titled Good-Natured Comedy to Enrich Climate Communication. In this particular communication, Chandler and his professor or his teammate explored the use of good-natured comedy to diversify the modes of comedy that can be used in climate change communication beyond satire to other modes that are possibly more supportive of sustained climate action. So I'm really very excited about hosting Chandler, and I'm very happy that he agreed to be part of the show. So Chandler, let's begin. How did you start? Like why art and why climate change and why is the intersection?
Sure. So I started off in environmental education, taking students into different ecosystems to explore and learn about them. And I did that in many places in the United States. And that eventually brought me up to Alaska, where I started work with the Center for Alaskan Coastal Studies to focus on intertidal ecology and marine biology. And then, as you mentioned, I was asked to take over a plastic pollution cleanup program as the International Coastal Cleanup Coordinator for the state. And I realized after a few years of doing this that it was this endless cycle of going out and collecting plastics from the beach. And I mean, there's an incredible amount of plastic on so many of the world's beaches, including up in Alaska. And we would go out and collect it, and then we would report on what we collected to conferences and different groups every year so that we could get funding to go and collect more of it, to come back and report about it. And I just realized we weren't reaching outside that small group each year, and really needed to expand the possibilities of communication through other forms of media and methods. So I asked an artist who I'd met at a conference named Angela Pozzi, who founded a project called the Washed Ashore Project, to come up to Alaska, and we built a set of sculptures out of the marine debris with the community that I was in, and we toured those around the state. And all of a sudden, we were getting invitations to places that I never would have expected to go talk about marine debris, to Denali National Park, you know, this huge mountain park in the middle of the state that said, come up and bring your sculptures, to zoos and galleries and places that hadn't had that conversation before. So I started to recognize that the arts had this ability to start conversations in ways that, you know, if I called these places up and I said, hey, I'd like to talk to you about plastic pollution, they'd probably go, no.
That's
So
true.
that's how it started. Yeah.
So, you know, when you talk about climate change, the worst thing, or you know, the main uh, gap or the difference, if you say, is lack of awareness. And there is no better tool than the tool that you chose to do it. So, can you take us through the inside the greenhouse project, because it looks very exciting, and having technical people, policy professors and students interacting with each other using these tools to convey a powerful message is something that, I mean, I haven't heard of it before, and from what I'm reading, it's the best way to increase the awareness.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so I'll just continue that story a little bit to get to the inside the greenhouse piece. So maybe it fits in and makes sense there. After Alaska, I went to work as the education director for Washed Ashore, where we were taking these large sculptures around the country, and different communities were asking, oh, could we do this here? And I was like, no, you should communicate with art and science in a way that gives your community a voice about things that matter. And they say, oh, how? And I'd say, I don't know. I don't know if there's any rules on how to do that. And so I noticed the Inside the Greenhouse project myself, because I started to get curious about how to create guidelines for partnering with the arts for communities who had that question and said, we want to do this. And I thought that if I could use what I was doing and what they're doing, which is fine art and media and performance around climate change, then we could get a broader set of guidelines about environmental issues
Yes.
and communicating with the arts. And Inside the Greenhouse is a really cool collaboration because it brings together professors from ecology and evolutionary biology and environmental studies and the policy realm, and then theater and dance and media and communications.
Yes.
And these professors have all recognized that if we can engage students and the community through the arts, especially around climate change, because unlike marine debris, I can't bring a big thing to you and say, hey, this is climate change. You know, I can bring a piece of plastic from the ocean.
True.
So it's so hard to have people experience and understand climate change physically
Yes.
in the way that many of these problems demand. So through the arts, we can have them do things like engage in performance, engage in comedy, engage in creation of art pieces that exemplify change over time for communities. And it opens up this world of possibility for communication. So that's really what Inside the Greenhouse is about.
No, that's very interesting. But can you just briefly, if possible, take us through a plot of one of such plays or dramas?
Sure. Let's see. So the project that I'm working on right now is connected to an Inside the Greenhouse project where one of the professors who led the publication you mentioned on comedy, she created a performance piece called Shine. And the first half is a scripted performance that goes from the Carboniferous era, prehistory, 300 million years ago, to act out and think through how this carbon was trapped in the form of fossil fuels and then released and is causing our current climate change issues. And then the second half of the play is created by the performers to focus on local resiliency solutions.
Okay.
And what we're doing now is taking that performance and creating a curriculum out of it to bring into to classrooms to help students consider those resiliency solutions and present them to their schools and their communities to help youth be authors of knowledge and initiators of action.
No, it's funny that you mentioned curriculum, because I wanted to ask you that as an educator yourself, how important you think it is to integrate climate change related knowledge and awareness into the curriculum.
I mean, I think it's important in every subject. And that's something I hope that education is moving towards. It's something that has been discussed, but we haven't really quite gotten there yet to say that if we want to teach about business, it should include environmental justice and climate change. That should be inseparable. If you want to teach about literature and philosophy, starting to integrate climate change into each one of these topics, into all these subjects and curriculum, I think it is what's needed to help people maintain focus and energy to spur action.
I fully agree with you. And what do you think? You're coming from the American background. You've been to many states, like you worked on different programs. How about the global scenario? How should educators across the globe, like let's say in the Indian subcontinent, in Africa, how should they find ways and means? Because I fully agree with you that in any part of curriculum, be it arts, be it science, be it technology, be it policy, inculcating or pushing, in fact, or showing climate change is necessary. But how localized you think should they be when they're doing it?
If I may, I'd like to kind of provide two answers to that.
Sure.
So part of the project that we're doing now to bring this to classrooms and give this to educators to work with students, we found pretty quickly that especially in elementary classrooms with 10, 11-year-old students at the most, when you ask them to think about resiliency and climate change, they don't know where to start. And so part of the work that we've been doing is working with Project Drawdown, who categorize the top 100 solutions to climate change by how much carbon they would reduce or carbon equivalents, and then the amount that the solution would cost and the eventual amount that it would save if there is a savings. Yeah, we really like the resource, but recognize that it's not languaged in a way that you could hand it to elementary students and be like, hey, read this and then figure out solutions, right?
True.
So part of our work is actually translating those solutions for elementary classrooms. And we feel like by giving students that broad list, it can help them to think about what is possible in a very local context. For instance, among the top solutions is food waste and reducing food waste because of the huge amount of carbon involved in producing and moving and the whole food system.
Yes.
If we can do that, it's going to take a lot of carbon out of the air just by reducing the waste. And when students see that, they go, oh, God, there's a lot of ways that I can work with that my community can work with that, school can work with that.
Yes.
And so I think the first step is to present a list of accessible solutions to students, and then prompt them to think about how those could be adapted locally.
No, I agree with you. In fact, there was another climate change joke that they were saying that climate change has prompted us to think globally, act locally, but panic internally. So I agree with you that there should be tailor-made, localized way of approaches to inculcate this into the curriculum. Now, as someone who is working with a lot of young students, budding researchers or scientists, if I may say, how important you think it is to have young people be more intensely associated with the climate change movement?
Hmm. Something interesting around that realm is that I think young people are very caring about it, and I see the youth climate change marches around the globe,
Yes.
and I see Greta and other activists. So I don't know that our work is to help them care, because I think they care. I think our work is to provide pathways to action for young people and let them know that this idea that children are our future is so disempowering. It's a terrible thing to say. I think that we need to say children are as much of our present as any of us are.
Yes.
And we have to start with that and let the youth know they have power to take action. And we need to give them the possibilities of what that action looks like, whether it's food waste, whether it's educating women and girls, whether it is looking at alternative transportation. The youth have great power. And so I really think that the key is to start connecting some of these marches that exhibit a huge amount of grief and anger.
Yes.
And focus those on action, so that the youth going out in the streets can say, we are angry and we have power to make change, and these are the changes we would like to make.
Yes. No, I fully agree with you. That we should not, go behind them saying that this is what's happening and all. Rather, give them the means or the weapons, or equip them with necessary infrastructure, necessary plans, necessary thoughts. Not thoughts exactly per se, but necessary tools, so that they can go more intensively into this fight. Now, coming back to you, you're also part of the Clean Network. So can you take us through what Clean Network is and what does it do?
Sure. So CLEAN stands for the Climate Literacy and Energy Awareness Network. It was started about 10 years ago when the US produced a framework for teaching about energy and climate, and they didn't give teachers a lot to go on with that. They just said, here's a framework, go. And so the Clean Network started to say, here's how you might go about bringing this framework into your classroom. And it started by creating a set of pages that would help educators to do that, which are available on the Clean website. And then we started gathering resources from scientists around the country to help teachers do their best work in classrooms, and teachers submit resources as well. So we've got a resource list, and then it's a weekly meeting to talk about the most urgent issues in climate and energy education as well.
Okay, no, that's very important because even in India also, we are now closely working. We have the Skill Council for Green Jobs, where they basically make these modalities and compendium, which can be used by educators to teach students. It will act as a reference for them. And I think that's a very noble initiative, and it's worth appreciating. Now, so you have been associated with Inside the Greenhouse Project. You have found the soft spot for art and climate change. I'll ask you one personal question, and it's up to you how you'll answer it. But how do you see memes as a weapon against climate change? Because when you talk about comedy, to some extent, pre-1970s, pre-1950s, comedy has a particular form. After 1970, comedy evolved. And most of the things that you're doing, film, fine art, performance art, television, comedy is consumed in all of these arts. And today, more predominantly than it was ever before, memes have become a mode of communication. Sitting in India, I can open 9gag and see what's happening, what are the memes being made by my American counterparts, and same thing is true for you. So where do you see memes in this entire pedagogy of comedy and climate change?
That's an interesting question. Um, I think part of what is happening around communication and formats of it is this condensing of ideas and information into smaller and smaller formats, which is both an advantage and disadvantage.
Yes.
Like art, good art, well done art, leaves people with questions rather than answers.
True.
And a good meme, I think, has someone look at it and go, ha, oh, and then they start to formulate questions around it, like, what does that mean? Why does that exist? Who is that? What's this problem? And I think that they can be powerful in that way. They follow many of the ideals of enabling people to approach them without triggering communication barriers necessarily, because one meme can mean something to me based on my communication framework, and it can mean a completely different thing to you. And so
Yes.
they lend themselves to interpretation in the same way that art does. And like quips, like puns, they can be quick and accessible forms of comedy that stick with you. And it's the stickiness of memes that I think has value. When it comes to being valuable in the larger sense, though, I think it's that way of eliciting questions that is really important, and not leaving the meme just to be like, here's a little thing, but rather, here's a little thing, and if you want to explore more what's going on here, here's
Yes.
access to the bigger tools around it, those
Yes.
bigger ideas.
No, I agree with you. And like just we were talking before the call, the attention span these days is not that much, because I was just again seeing a meme. So they were like, there's a coronavirus epidemic, and he panics, and then there is a cute kitten video, and then like, how okay. Then again next to that there are 10,000 cases, and again panics. Then there's a cute dog video. So there is the attention span is very less, or in fact negligible these days. And what you said, it actually matters how it sticks, and the way it sticks is the way it conveys the message. Now
And
finally,
it's potential to lead to bigger ideas as well.
exactly,
Yeah.
because
Sorry to interrupt.
as a matter of fact, there are a lot of meme pages, meme groups in Facebook, in Twitter, even on Instagram, and they have millions of followers, and these meme pages are meme on climate change and jokes on climate change. So it actually says how people are relating to what the contemporary style of communicating is. Now, shifting back to our topic here. So, how do you think? Because I come from a family of teachers. I'm third generation, though I teach as a part time, but my grandfather and my father and mother, both of them are educators. Both of them have been teaching for more than 30, 35 years. And I, in my growing up, I was always in the fraternity and brotherhood of other teachers who are happen to be colleagues of my parents. So they have their own way. Every educator has his own way of bringing up innovation or brushing up a particular topic so that it will ignite interest in students. Now that is for specific subjects. When this is something of utmost importance like climate change, do you think there should be a global perspective in the way we shape the curriculum and then modify it locally? Because you have answered some part of this question previously also when I was asking you about the content and localization, but this is more specific from the educator's point of view.
So I think, there's so many really good guides to climate communication. And they all have a bunch of like, do these 5 things, do these 10 things, but more than anything, as an educator, I feel like the idea that you have to meet your students where they're at is essential.
Yes.
So starting with, so the answer is like, it depends because you don't want to just drop these huge ideas, these overwhelming ideas, heartbreaking ideas on students that aren't ready for that level of engagement. So starting with seeing what they understand so far, what they've already sat with and brought in, and then taking it to a level that will enable them to access that idea without raising these barriers that that create hopelessness. Because the biggest danger I see around teaching this is doing it in a way that leads students to believe that the future is already written and that it's terrible.
Yes.
And I think that you can do that if you're delicate in understanding what your students know and how to meet them there. And also, as I mentioned before, pathways to action are absolutely essential as an educator, because the last thing you want to do is introduce these ideas to students and then say, yep, things are really screwed up. Good luck. You really want to be able to say to them, if you care about this, here are ways that we can engage. And there's not a right and a wrong way to engage. So
Yes.
in answer to your question, you can do that from the global level by trying to influence policy at the UN, things like that.
Yes.
You can do it at the country level by trying to access policies on that scale and behavior change on that scale. You can definitely do it at the local level by looking at what your community is doing, and that's the way that you talk about this. I think depends on the type of solution that you're trying to achieve, whether it's action and behavior change, which are much easier at the local level, or policy and national attitudes, which you can do at bigger levels, but it's more challenging.
Yes.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that very well answers my question, and you have actually emphasized this very well, that it's, instead of invoking fear, you can proactively, in a positive manner, provide them with options, provide them with methodologies, provide them with pathways, like you mentioned, in which they can contribute their might. Now, finally, any words for the young people who are fighting the fight for us, and how can we motivate them much more?
One thing that has really stuck with me, I was listening to indigenous leaders, Native American groups discussing climate change, and one of the comments that was made that I think really resonates with this exact time is that we cannot hope to address climate change unless we address colonialism. And
Yes.
that is a huge concept, right? But
It is.
I think that for young people, it's really unsatisfying to be given part of the picture and not the whole picture. To put the blinders on and say, okay, now we're going to focus on this one problem and ignore those problems. And one of the most important things to recognize is that the systems that we're in, that were built on the backs and on the lives of many people, have created a situation in which climate change is inevitable.
Yes.
Because through a patriarchal capitalistic colonialism, we've shaped a system in which there are power dynamics that say, if you can exploit people, you should. And
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. And if you can take advantage of those around you to make money, that will give you power.
Yes.
And until we start addressing that, we can't hope to address climate change. And we see that bubbling up in the racial conflicts around the United States right now. that these underlying power structures and ways of doing things have built a society that's deeply unequal, deeply exploitive of resources, and deeply uncaring of the consequences. And so my message for young people, as these conflicts bubble up in so many ways in so many countries around the world, is that it is a connected system that has to be considered and disassembled. And asking themselves, you know, in what way do they, as individuals, as a community, as a society, promote this patriarchal colonialism, this exploited mentality
Yes.
that will inevitably further these problems, and starting there to consider the entire system and not just the symptoms of the problems, of which climate change is one.
Exactly. No, I fully agree with you. The inherent system is rigged against someone who can easily who is vulnerable and can get exploited. And that stands same for Mother Nature also. Everyone is taking granted that you can exploit the nature, you can use it, but if you can abuse it too. So, and that's unfortunately the reason why we are all here. But your message is right on point, and the entire picture should be given to youth across the world, and they should become more resilient for fighting against the resilience of climate. So, thank you very much, Chandler. I'm very, very, very happy to interact with you today. In fact, I've been planning to do this episode for quite a long time, for my first or second episodes, but because of our time zones and our schedules, we were unable to schedule it. But I'm very happy and I'm very thankful to you. And I hope there will be some day, if not far but very near in the future, where we will see a climate change based movie win the Oscars or bring the Academy Awards. And I hope to see you being part and parcel of it. And you have all the support of us, the youth who are watching this, and youth across the globe who have any sort of interest or alignment towards arts and some or the other way of thinking about climate change. So thank you very much for your time, and let's pose a picture with your cup for our cover picture. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
You too. Bye.